오늘 이렇게 좋은 날씨에 별마당 도서관에서 함께 모여주신 여러분께 진심으로 감사드립니다. 정말 한국이 이렇게 멋진 나라가 됐습니다. 그래서 정말 대한민국에 프리즈 아트 페어가 왔고요. 또 키아프와 함께 더불어서 정말 대단한 아트 페어가 한국에서 열리게 됐습니다. 정말 기쁜 일이 아닐 수 없는 것 같아요. 이런 때 저희가 정말 글로벌 아트 시장이 어떻게 진행이 되고 정말 이러한 때에 우리나라 시장뿐만 아니라 이 아시아가 세계적인 마켓으로 도래하는데 어떻게 발전을 할지 우리가 앞으로 알아보는 것은 굉장히 중요한 시대적 이야기고 소명일 것 같다는 생각이 듭니다. 그러한 맥락에서 저희가 정말 멋진 글로벌 명사들을 모셨습니다. 특별히 이 별마당 도서관은 정말 세계적인 명사들이 모여서 하는 정말 중요한 공공장소입니다. 신세계가 이렇게 좋은 장소를 저희에게 제공해 주셔서 많은 중요한 명사들의 특강들이 이루어지는 이 자리에서 저희의 정말 세계적인 전문가들이 한자리에 모였습니다. 그런 분들의 강의를 오늘 하루 종일 4개의 세션으로 들어보게 되는데요. 첫 번째는 세계는 왜 한국을 주목하는가? 두 번째는 아시아 시장은 어떻게 발전을 해왔는가? 세 번째는 도대체 이 NFT 마켓이라는 것, 미디어 아트가 어떻게 발전해 나갈 것인가? 그리고 네 번째는 글로벌 최고의 미술관이라는 곳들은 어떻게 신진 작가들을 발굴하는가? 이 4가지의 꼭지는 아마 우리가 모두가 관심이 있는 주제가 아닐까 생각합니다. 그 4가지에 대한 꼭지를 정말 우리나라에 있는 전문가들의 강의도 들으실 곳이 한국에서 많이 있기 때문에 세계적 그 환경에서 일하시는 분들의 얘기들을 정말 솔솔히 들어보고자 합니다. Because we have great guests, so I like to speak in English in short. First of all, I do thank you for great guests and friends today. I do welcome you to Korea. And first of all, this is the first launch of Korean Global Art Talk in Seoul. I think I do welcome for great speakers and friends and guests today. And I think it's such a wonderful time to have all of you today. And it's such a wonderful time in Seoul to listen to all your great speakers, lectures in Korea on live today, openly, freely to the public, to share all these lectures together with our MZ generation, to share our stories about why the world is interested in Korean market now, and how this Asian market has been developed in last 15 years. And the third, what is this NFT? What is this NFT market grows in the future? And how this global museum selected new talents. These 4 sessions, we all wanted to inquire and wanted to know. And those 4 sessions, we love to listen to international players and professionals today. So I hope you stay together with us and then listen with all great speakers today. Thank you very much for your time, and then stay with us today. And then our talk program is going to be online under the YouTube called Nowhere Institute. Thank you very much again today. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I now hear that you can hear me. Welcome to this first panel discussion of the Global Art Talk, so kindly hosted by SUUM Art Projects. And before I begin to introduce myself, as well as our first panel, I want to extend my deep gratitude to Ji-Yoon Lee, the founder of SUUM Art Projects, for really initiating such an important conversation that we hope will provide everybody with a lovely day today, but will really extend its remit beyond the day today. In order to begin, I will outline briefly what we're going to do in the first hour and how we hope that we can really set the scene for this afternoon's conversation by talking about the Korean art market within its global environment. And I hope that this will provide some interesting insights, but also overview for the rest of the afternoon. The way we will organize the next hour is that I will introduce each of our distinguished speakers. They will then give a 5 to 10 minute overview based on their expertise and their experience. And I think that will take us through roughly half the session. And then for the next 30 minutes, we will have a discussion between us. And yes, and probably we will touch upon a lot of subjects that hopefully the other talks will go into further depth. But before I carry on, I should probably introduce myself first. My name is Stefani Dieckvoss. I'm a German art historian based in London. I'm a writer, journalist, and lecturer, and I'm specialized in studies on the art market. And it is a great pleasure for me to be here today and to introduce our panel. I also want to apologize because I know that apart from James, who obviously is Korean, I will introduce him as our first presenter, that the discussion is in English, so I very much hope that we speak slowly enough, that the translations is okay, and that you can hear us very well, both in the room but also online. So, what we're discussing in the first hour is maybe a bit ambitious. We want to be setting the scene, and we're going to discuss very much the advent of the global art market and current issues relating to the global art market, but within a Korean context. We, both, I think, people in Korea, but also us people coming from Europe and America, are really interested to understand what is happening now, why is the global art market interested in Korea now, which has such a vibrant art scene already. I have to admit, I've never been to Seoul before, but even in the last 48 hours, I learned so much, and I'm so impressed by the vibrancy, the size, the scale of the city, its institutions, in its artistic energy and innovation, but also, of course, the significance of its commercial sector that, I think it's really interesting to understand what an important player Seoul is already, at least in the Korean and the Asian market, and why now the rest of the world, I should add, is looking at you. So, but enough from me. As I say, we are starting with 3 individual presentations, and before we drift in the global art market, I really want to invite James Lee to begin the conversation. James Lee is a very important gallerist, but I also learned that he worked and was a writer, and once his heart is also in writing, so I'm very excited to present him to you if you don't know him already. He is the founding principal of gallery BB&M, which opened as a gallery last October, but whose roots go back to 2009 as an art consultancy working in partnership with PKM Gallery in Seoul. James Lee created an exhibition program for PKM that positioned the gallery at the forefront of the contemporary sector in Asia. In its current iteration as an independent gallery, in the cultural storied district of Seungkho-dong, BB&M continues its mission of advocating for artists engaging critically with contemporary issues. He's representing such leading Korean figures as Lee Bul, Bae Jung-won, and Jang Ya-kim, as well as international artists rising in recognition, among them Elec Dorch and Wilco Weldkamp. And really, I do apologize if I pronounce Korean names not entirely correctly. Mr. Lee brings decades of varied experiences in the art world as a writer for various international art magazines, but also as a curator in institutions. As the head of exhibitions at Art Jeondae Center, Seoul, and as director of exhibitions at the Gwangju Biennial Foundation. And as already mentioned, as a commercial part in the commercial sector, as a partner at PKM Gallery Seoul. He was trained in finance at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, before earning a master's in writing from Columbia University in New York. James, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I'll try to go very quickly through, if we could go back to the previous slide. There's the first slide. Okay, well, we'll take this as the first slide. It really doesn't matter. There are essentially, I think, two sets of factors that account for what is happening in the Korean market today, and some of them are non-art factors, obviously, and we're very familiar with some of these already. My focus will be on the art world, obviously, but all right, sorry. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So my focus will be on the art world, but I want to mention some of the non-art factors, because without those, I don't think that we'll have the phenomenon that we have here today. It's just, the first one is the general economic development of Korea over the past couple of decades, which we're familiar with, but now we are the 10th largest economy in the world by GDP, the 7th largest in terms of trade, and these things are hard to ignore when you're talking about a growth of any market. And along with this, we have now a lot of cultural products that are getting more recognition on the international stage. So in cinema, in popular music, even cuisine and sports, all of these things make Korea as a nation, makes Korea kind of a premium brand, which did not used to be the case. And finally, I want to talk about how Korea has benefited from some of the geopolitical shifts that have taken place in Asia over these recent years. As we know, Korea is a very stable and a very open democratic society, and has been for now almost for 40 years, 35, 40 years. And this is something that we can't ignore when businesses, investments, foreign investments coming into the country are looking for a place to set up shop in order to look at the broader Asian market. So Korea is becoming increasingly attractive as a place where international businesses, including the art industry, can come in and set up shop with a view not only to the local market, but to the broader Asian market. So those are the non-art factors. And I think we can just move on to the art factors, which I think we're more interested in. So as I see it, there are three essential art factors at play in what has happened to the Korean art world and the Korean art market. And the first is that we have now a group of internationally relevant artists who sort of create an art scene that is worthy of notice by the broader international art world. And this did not happen overnight. As an observer of the Korean art scene over the past, at least since the mid-90s, I would say that this process began during that early to mid-90s, as continued through the 2000s, as some of the key artists who sort of came to prominence in those periods became much more established figures on the international scene. And, you know, essentially, at some point, the international market caught up with the Korean art scene, and they decided, well, you know, maybe the Korean art market is also worth taking a notice in. If we could go to the next slide. So some of these artists that are now well established on the global stage are familiar to most of you. People like Lee Bull, Do Ho Seo, Haegyu Yang, and Kim Soo-ja are, you know, for the international art world, very familiar names. And these are obviously now figures who are exhibited and collected by major institutions, as well as private collectors throughout the world. And I think this is key to establishing an art world and subsequently an art market that deserves attention beyond the region and beyond the local scene where these artists are based. Clearly, these are global artists with a global presence and, you know, obviously also a global market. We could go to the next slide, please. And so, you know, I just want to make the point that it seems obvious that before there can be an art market that is worthy of notice by the world beyond the local scene, there has to be an art world. And the art world comes about through the activities of talented, ambitious artists who are pushing beyond the local boundaries and into the broader world. And I just mentioned some of the most prominent ones, but there are others. And I'll just note just a few such artists. If we could go to the next, people like Minuk Lim, Park Chang-kyung, Bae Young-wan, all of whom I've worked with before, but there are many more artists such as these doing critically relevant work that is shown in museum shows, biennials throughout the world. And in the process, they have created an impression of a Korean art world that has depth and that has breadth. And so, you know, it's a little bit different from, say, having an art market only. Because if you have only an art market, that is almost a seasonal thing. Let's say, you know, to take for example, Basel, Switzerland. It's really a seasonal phenomenon. You don't go there year-round to discover necessarily sort of the artistic activities that are taking place there. And that is something that is fundamentally different about Korea and in particular Seoul. Art professionals come here year-round. People who aren't necessarily directly involved in the market, but certainly people who are influential in shaping how this art world is perceived and how it is then valued artistically, which translates into how it is valued as a market financially. And so, if we could go to the next slide. These are just some of the works by the three artists I mentioned just previously. They're all quite well known on the international stage. But while I have this slide up here, I do want to touch upon sort of the most recent and most prominent phenomenon when anyone thinks of the Korean art market, which is the market for dansekwa, which is that a genre of painting that is monochromatic abstraction done by an older generation of painters, typically in their 70s and 80s. And the reason I do not touch upon those artists in my presentation here as a focus of why the Korean art scene is what it is today is because I do see them being obviously sort of the catalyst for supercharging an interest in the Korean market. However, unfortunately, they worked in a period, they worked in an era when there was very little attention being paid to Korean art. And so for much of their most active periods, those artists went under-recognized or unrecognized by the world beyond Korea and maybe Japan. And so in that sense, I can't say that they have played a role, that sort of crucial role in creating an art world, a contemporary art world that we sort of recognize as the Korean contemporary art scene today. This is not to diminish their importance to the history of Korean painting and Korean art, but it is as a factor in what is happening today, I feel it is tangential, meaning it is a catalyst for the market, but not necessarily central to the creation of an art world that is critically relevant to artists today, curators today, critics today, or even a younger, more sophisticated, informed generation of collectors around the world. You know, these paintings obviously are increasing in value very quickly, and I think a lot of people have an interest in that aspect without necessarily recognizing that there is a much broader, deeper, more adventurous Korean contemporary world, art world. And so I just want to touch upon that because I don't want to neglect it, but I do want to make that distinction. And I do feel that one of the contributions, or not the contribution, but one of the results of the phenomenal success of Dieckvoss in the market, beyond Korea and Asia even, is that it has sort of established in the minds of art world people who do have an interest in the market that, Korea is a serious market. This is not going to be a boom and bust, because the artists who sort of form the core of that Dieckvoss market are honestly, they are very important to the formation of sort of discourses around painting, modernity, within Korea as well as Asia. And I think art history will record that, and that is all to the good, because I think that is what should be valued by the market. And so it creates the impression that Korea has a market now that is, worth paying attention to. Whereas over the past 2-3 decades, Korea was building up an art world with artists who were clearly, worth paying attention to. So if we could go to the next one. So the most important art factor I mentioned is just critically relevant artists who are exhibiting and being collected on the international stage. But the other thing is that Korea also has a very established art infrastructure at the moment. And this also did not happen overnight. Broadly speaking, this also sort of parallels the rise of the artists that I mentioned previously, because these artists began exhibiting in alternative spaces, art centers, or in European parlance, Kunsthalles, before eventually going on to exhibiting in biennials that were international, and then finally museums that were set up by, in Korea's case, wealthy corporate through wealthy corporate patronage. So some of the most prominent ones, if we could go to the next slide, in terms of alternative spaces, which all began in the late 90s and continue to serve a vital purpose, but in some ways the alternative spaces became integrated into the actual public art infrastructure. So many people who were curators, people who were involved in these activities are now curators and directors at public museums, for instance, the Seoul Museum of Art, and which I find to be a very salutary result, that spirit that animated these alternative spaces have now become integrated into the official sort of public art support structure. And then if we could go to the next slide. And then there's also, we can't neglect the rise of biennials, which also took place really in the 90s, with Gwangju in 95, established in 95, Busan in 98, and thereafter Seoul Media City. And what this did was it obviously encouraged greater interchange of artistic ideas between the local scene and everything that was coming from different places throughout the world. And this happened, this has been happening every 2 years now since the 90s, and that effect cannot be obviously neglected. And finally, we have museums. As I mentioned, the museums also, we have now a very world-class sort of art infrastructure in terms of museums, I believe, with the establishment of the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in the heart of Seoul, among the galleries, and that took place in 2013. But prior to that, we had museums that were set up by, I think I can name these corporate patrons by name because everybody knows who they are. Samsung, Daewoo, others. More recently, Amore Pacific, Colon, these are all really collectors who had a long history of collecting art that was being valued as being relevant. And then they have set up more recently museums to showcase their collections, as well as encouraging sort of, new art from abroad being exhibited here, as well as Korean artists showing in these spaces. So all of these sort of infrastructure, also not overnight. These things took place over the 90s, 2000s, and the most recent, phenomenon is the establishment of more sort of really very institutional level private museums. And finally, I just want to go to, which is connected to all of this. I really feel that we are now in a moment where there is a shift, generational shift, in that in patrons and collectors, and this is just natural result of time passing and people getting older. So the older generation is handing off the baton to the next generation, their children. And I find that this to be a hallmark of a mature art world, when that sort of tradition of patronage and collecting good art gets handed down from one generation to the next. And we see this as a sign that this market, this art world, will continue to expand, continue to grow in a way that is in keeping with how we value art, that is to say, artistically and critically. And finally, I just want to say that the new generation of collectors, which I encounter every day, and I am surprised to see how every day I'm getting older while they get younger, and I'm also surprised to discover all the various different ways in which wealth is being created in Korean society today. It's not just in obviously manufacturing and the traditional industries, things that I think bode well for Korean society as a whole and the Korean art market, because these people are engaged in wealth creation in areas that are clearly forward-looking, future-oriented, and this I find very sort of inspiring and heartening, and that's where I would like to end my presentation. And this has sort of fueled the growth of younger galleries being set up by people who have been professionally educated abroad and worked in international galleries, as well as people like myself who, finally decided maybe this is the moment to really sort of contribute to what's happening in the art market here. Sorry, it went on too long, didn't it?
No, thank you so much, James. I think that was just perfect. And I think it was a really good introduction. And You were laying out so convincingly why it really is inevitable that Seoul and Korea within a global art market has been playing an important role, is now playing an important role in this pivotal moment, but will continue to play this important role and maybe even and hopefully extending it. I think you made the factors really, really clear, and I think it was really wonderful to hear from you so convincingly that we're not talking about a boom and bust situation. So I think if anyone had any doubt before that, before today about that, we all now know that this is not going to happen. So thank you so much for laying out the Korean scene so clearly and succinctly. So now I would like to introduce our next presenter, Stefano Rabolli Pansera, a wonderful Italian architect, curator, and also former gallery director, is going to talk a little bit, or beginning to talk about the global context in which these developments are taking place at the moment. Stefano is the founder and director of the St. Moritz Art Film Festival, which just took place for the first time, and where he literally flew off to Seoul after finishing the festival. And I really want to congratulate him on, conducting that so successfully, and also for including Korean artists into the festival. He's also has been to Seoul many of times, and really would love to do more in the Asian area. So I'm glad that apart from me, everyone knows so well. So as I said, Stefano is an architect and curator. After graduating from the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London in 2005, he first worked with Herzog and de Meuron in Basel from 2005 to 2007, and then taught at the Architectural Association in London from 2007 to 2011. In 2013, he founded a company called Beyond Entropy Limited, a curatorial agency and platform operating at the threshold of art, architecture, and geopolitics, developing projects in Africa, Europe, and the Mediterranean coastline. Stefano curated several national pavilions at the Biennale in Venice, and in 2013, he was the recipient of the Golden Lion for the best national participation in Venice for the Angolan Pavilion. But not enough with that. In 2015, he designed Mangiabake Open Air Gallery and directed the exhibition program for the MACC, a non-for-profit space in the west of Sardinia in Italy. From 2017 to this year, Stefano worked as director for Hauser&Wirth Gallery in London and opened the Hauser&Wirth Gallery in St. Moritz in Switzerland, while continuing working on several initiatives in Europe and Asia, developing institutional projects with Christoph Büchel and with the Panzer de Biomo collection, amongst others. Thank you, Stefano, for being here, and I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you, Ji-yoon, for inviting me here. I really liked the distinction that James before did between the art world and the art market. And I think that my presentation will really focus precisely on the possibility to still distinguish between these two realms. And because of that, today I decided to present very briefly what I consider the first example of globalization in the art world. Behind me there is an image of a beautiful palace in the north of Italy. It's a Villa Panza, a place that Ji-yoon and I visited several times. This place is actually a temple for American art in Europe. It all started when a very distinguished gentleman, Italian gentleman, decided to spend 6 months every year in the US looking for new unknown artists, doing studio visits, exploring the desert, taking the plane of Jim Starrell and flying over the double negative. He was really like a pioneer of a new form of art. he was considered completely crazy by his family. They said that you go to the US, you spend 6 months, you waste a lot of money, and you come back with some pieces of plumbing or some pieces of metal that have no sense. And of course, the metal works was designed by Donald Judd. And this was, for me, like a sign of, and still today, it is a sign of hope from another planet. Because this type of collecting today is incredibly rare. I would say almost impossible. Because it is not just about acquiring work, it's really about sharing your own creativity through or with the creativity of the artists. And I think that this is really like a mission or a task that the Panza collection invites us to take. The following image behind me, there is one of the most extraordinary results of this collaboration. Is a very famous corridor called the Dan Flavin corridor in Villa Panza, where for the first time the work of Dan Flavin was not seen directly with the neon that created this composition of light, but people walked into the corridor and just saw the light coming out of the rooms. So there is almost like a prefiguration, like the eve, the announcement of an artwork. This was the result of a crazy fight between the collector and the artist. Because Dan Flavin was really interested in the modular side of the neon lights. He was not really so interested in the light. Giuseppe Panza came from a completely different background, a European background, and he was really fascinated by the spiritual aspect of the light. And he convinced Dan Flavin to really experience first the light, and then when people enter into the room, they can see the modularity of the neon. And this is an example of what collecting can be. It is really like the dialogue and the continuous appropriation of the creativity of the artist through the point of view of the collector. And this is because, please, in the next slide, Giuseppe Panza did not just buy artworks, he studied them. And he had a beautiful expression. He said that he wanted to collect artworks that were able to express what he was not able to verbalize himself, which I think is a fantastic way to construct a position about what he's collecting today. And this beautiful image behind me of Giuseppe Panza studying the work of Sol LeWitt in front of him really reveals this attitude, which I think is very urgent to keep in our mind. I mentioned before that this is like a position that is very rare to find today. Giuseppe Panza used to say that if you like art, art is going to like you. If you exploit art, art is going to exploit you. And he was right. I think that he's still like a very, very valid point. And in the next image, you can see that nowadays, the distinction that James made before between the art world and the art market is impossible. It's impossible because the discourse on the art world is completely overlapped with the market evaluation of art. I don't now say if it is right or wrong. I just say that this is a fact. And I am very, for example, impressed by the fact that we needed to reassure ourselves that the extraordinary diversity, complexity, and wealth of Korean artwork is not really disappearing in the discourse on the Korean art market. In fact, there is so much more that the artwork can give us than simply art market. But today, the proliferation of mega galleries, the proliferation of art fair is so strong that we are facing a situation of more of the same. We are in New York, we are in Seoul, we are in Dubai, in Milan, and we basically see the same people, the same artists, the same works of the same artists, because of course the first rule of marketing is repetition is reputation. The more you repeat the same thing, the more people recognize you, and the higher is the value. And how can we start from a privileged point of view, like Korea, thinking about new possibilities of actions and new alternatives? And I believe that artists are always the only compass we have to understand the world we live in. And because of that, I would like to finalize the presentation with an image from an extraordinary artist that I had the privilege to represent while working with Hauser&Wirth. Is Paul McCarthy. There is a very old work by Paul from the 80s. The title is Imitating Hollywood. You know, Paul McCarthy lives in Los Angeles, and all his work can be seen as a critique to the film production of Hollywood and the simulation war that you can see in the west coast of the US. And in a very short movie, Imitating Hollywood, he invited like a group of actors to play a very banal scene in like a saloon with a cowboy talking with each other. And it's interesting because he did not invite non-professional actors, but he invited professional Hollywood actors to play badly. So it is very interesting because he works and he acknowledges the horizon we need to work in, which in this case is Hollywood, in our case is the art market, yet he introduced some form of internal resistance so that you cannot really quite fit in or fit completely into it. And you know, if we could try to find the slogan is inside but against. We should really be inside the market, because if we are outside the market, we simply don't exist. Yet we should be able to constitute internal forms of resistance in order to show that there is a possibility to do more and otherwise than what the market offers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefano, for really carrying on some of the thoughts that James expressed and making it really clear. I think something that everybody who's listening today should take home, which is also that engaging with art, being it visiting museums, being it collecting, is never a passive enterprise where you just stare at something at one of these global art fairs and you get a price tag and you might want to take it home, but that in the best cases and supporting the most promising artists, it should be a collaboration or can be a collaboration between the artist and the collector. And I think that is something that we would do well to remember to this day, that it also means taking risks, what James talked about also in terms of younger generations of collectors, but also looking at younger generations of artists. And Panzer di Biomo took, of course, risks by showing all these American artists in Europe at a time where they were not accepted. So I think that's a really important lesson to take away. And the other point, of course, that I'm sure we hear more or maybe more about from Kelly in a second, or we will draw back into in our discussion, is of course that the machine of the global art market is not only a promise, but it's also a challenge, and that we overall, but also I think a city or an art world like Seoul needs to or should be hopefully be aware that sort of the arrival of international fairs, mega galleries, international money has great opportunities, but it's good to also know how we navigate that to the best benefit of the local and Asian art scene overall. So thank you for making these really interesting points. So now I'm delighted to introduce our last presenter today. And in a way, she doesn't need an introduction. She is Kelly Crow from the Wall Street Journal. And now I need my glasses in order to, rally off all the important things she has written about for a long time in the art market. But I will be brief, although I could go on forever. So Kelly Crow is a staff reporter covering the art market for the American Wall Street Journal. She reports on sales at auction houses, including Sotheby's and Christie's, as well as analyzes the funding and art buying activities of the world's major art museums, art fairs, artists and collectors around the world. Kelly has covered the art market for the journal since 2006, and I think that gives her a really also long-term perspective into the developments we have occurring now. Kelly won the Front Page Award from the Newswomen's Club of New York in 2009 for her profile of an FBI officer who recovered stolen art, and the Deadline Club Award for Arts Reporting only last year in 2021 from the New York chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists for her coverage of the digital art boom. And already Ji-yoon has introduced the notion of NFTs, and anyone who also wants to know more about it should read Kelly's articles. And she lives in Texas with her family, and I'm delighted to welcome her here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming out and sitting in a noisy but honestly stunning library to talk about art. This is my first time to Seoul, and I'm thrilled to be here. I write for a newspaper that likes markets and likes money, so I might be the voice up here that doesn't hate the art market. I find money to be a very useful lens through which to analyze what we value. For instance, if you had an exercise where someone were to take a look at your credit card statement, they could extrapolate a lot about what you value, because you tend to spend money on the things that you value. And I think it reveals a lot about the things you care about, because you literally put your money where your mouth is. And so for me, following the money in the art world is a lovely trip, and my passport thanks you for it. Because honestly, when I first started at the journal, the art world really was an American and European game, right? Like, Europeans and Americans determined the taste. They set the values. If you did not understand Picasso, sorry, like we did, and you were going to have to pay our price or go home. And the lovely thing that I started to notice very early on was that this wall of money, right, from the wealth boom started to come, and you saw Russians, and you saw Chinese, and you saw, folks from Brazil and India start to make enough money that they could not only pay their bills and put their children through school, but they could really start to announce their arrival, right? And most people do that through money. I mean, merchant princes and popes and kings have always done this, right? We've always sort of announced what matters to us by buying art that reflects our values and our cultural upbringing. And I, for one, was thrilled when I started to see Asia really exert itself, right? Like, if Ming vases matter, we should be paying as much for them as a Claude Monet. And honestly, when I started at the art market, that was such heresy, right? Because there was still such a European and American taste that pervaded everything. So I noticed first that mainland China was really becoming a major player. And so I think I started first in terms of Asia, apologies, trying to understand mainland China, right? Because it was just so much money so quickly. And you were seeing the prices that they were paying for all sorts of things, not only their own material goods, but just Western art, right? Really exert itself. They were a little nervous, I think, to start buying Western art. They wanted to start with things that felt like home, with jades, with Wang Huali. They wanted to start with furniture that they recognized, which is fine. But then they started to migrate to Western art, and you saw the Western galleries respond. It really turned Hong Kong into such a major global hub, right, that now it ranks alongside London and New York as just a marketplace you can't ignore. I feel like the story with Korea, and again, because every culture is different and every collecting generation has its own unique traits, I think the story in Korea is interesting, and that's why I'm here to learn what makes it distinct. The story, as I've been told, is that Koreans were really, far and away collecting Western art back in the 60s, not only the monochromes, as James has wisely brought up, but they were, I mean, I met them because they were, you know, bidding on Damien Hirst in the Lehman Brothers sale just right along with everyone else, right? There was such a confidence in Western art that was commendable, but I will admit that I didn't see as much confidence in local, young, emerging art. They were comfortable playing it safe, right, with Western artists, but I really wanted to see more growth and more championing, right, of the art scene that was existing here in Korea, which James has also very smartly laid out. So now I feel like we're starting to have this interesting sea change, right? In the last 2 or 3 years, you're starting to see this really great young generation of Korean collectors come, and they really want to buy art that reflects their own time, and they want to support local artists and local galleries, and not just you know, stuff that they can find at auction far away. And that, to me, I think was the missing ingredient. I think that's why I held off coming until now. I just wanted to see that. You want to see the full ingredient mix, right, for an art scene to really develop organically, and at least for the market to pounce on it. So I'm here, and I feel like we have interesting things to learn from the Chinese, because they went in really hot and heavy. This guy, by the way, was one of Beijing's biggest car dealers. And he very quickly bought this huge clubhouse, and he had these walls that were like panels with a remote control, and he invited me out, and he like sat there and like a James Bond villain, honestly. He hit this remote control, and all the panels started like sliding back with all this art that he had bought sort of breathlessly. He still is a great collector, and he's learned a lot, and we're still friendly, but I think like the Chinese just went all in. And what I think is helpful to keep in mind, right, is that I think so far the Korean collectors that I've met are very thoughtful, right? And they like to do the research, and they like to think about things. Yes, some of the young ones can get caught up in some of the speculative fever, which sometimes attaches itself to sort of a growing scene. But I'm really interested to see what happens next, and that's partly why I'm here, is to learn from you all, and to see which artists you guys pick to pay for, because we'll probably be following in your steps soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for giving us a world tour on the developments of the Asian art market in the last maybe 10 years or so. I would like to actually start with a question that is right at the center of what we want to discuss today, and I'm glad that we have around 10 more minutes for discussion between us here. And it's a question, I guess, both for Stefano and Kelly, but I think James made very clear in his overview why Seoul is so important, or Korea is so important. What I would like to hear from you, both maybe from a professional and also personal point of view, is why is the art world globally paying attention now? Is it just money? Is it artistic, creativity and interest? And maybe also, why has it taken so long? Because I think one thing we did hear is that Korean collectors have been active on the international scene for a long time. We also hear that people were aware of Korean artists for a long time, and I think I can also speak for German collectors and institutions that they have been following Korean artists for decades. What is, from the international perspective, why is Frieze launching now? Why is the global art world, or the rest of Europe and for a degree America, why are you here today?
Okay, I'll take a quick pass and then I'll go. So I think the debate that I've been having with a lot of people at dinners and lunches since I've been here is Seoul versus Hong Kong, right? That they're pitting sort of this interesting competition. What I think is happening is that the travel restrictions and the vibe, frankly, in Hong Kong is so restricted right now that it's really given Seoul an opportunity to really step forward. And there are a lot of folks around the world who have not been to Asia since the pandemic, and we're very curious to come and see and do. And it's really difficult to get to Beijing, almost impossible. Hong Kong only has a 3-day quarantine right now, but it has its own sort of political instability and its own sort of issues that I think it will power through. The auction houses are determined for them to power through, but I think that gives others in the region, right, a chance to sort of flex a little bit. And I'm hoping that that's what we're seeing Korea do, which is just literally sort of step into the calendar and flex a little bit. One of the things that I think has held the Korean art scene back, though, is that the international world likes to see what you guys own. They want to see it. We want to see how you live with art. We want to be welcomed into your homes. We want you guys to display and lend and show the pieces that you own, because collecting is such a personal story. That you just met with the Villa Panza, his story of how he came into art and the things that he bought as a result. We are naturally, as humans, storytellers, and we want to hear that story. Even curators are telling a story through the artist. So I feel like there was such an emphasis on discretion, and for tax reasons or whatever reasons, maybe just naturally, that closed door works. It keeps people out. And I think Korean collectors do need to be willing to give some love to the artists that you guys love, right? By letting people see what you own, by letting people curate shows from things that you've bought, by being willing to participate in moments like this where you open up and you talk about what you love and the art that you love. I think that's probably what Korea needed and still needs a little bit.
I would like to add one complementary perspective onto this point. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is because the art world is an ecosystem. You need to have collectors, you need to have artists, you need to have schools, you need to have journalists, you need to have museums. It is just the combination of all these factors that creates a healthy and sustainable art world. And that's why this is the reason why it's not immediate that there is an art scene in a specific place. Why Art Basel is in Basel and in Switzerland? Because in Switzerland you have all the ingredients, all the components at the highest possible level, and everything is concurring for this target. You have unbelievable collectors, great schools, great artists graduating from the school and immediately being collected by collectors, so that they don't have to go to work as a bricklayers or as assistants, because they can already live with their work. If every component and every actor does his role, of course you have like a vibrant art scene. And I think that what is phenomenal about Korea is that, again, you have all the components here. You have unbelievable museums, you have fantastic artists, as James presented, you have very active collectors. And it's really a unique scene that, of course, took some time to be constructed, but now is there and is an amazing platform for very stable and fertile development.
Thank you very much. I want to hopefully come back to James and of course, invite you to add to that, maybe from your perspective and the global, if you wanted to. But if not, my next question would be, and I think it was interesting how Kelly was really talking about how, of course, the international journalism, but also I think international galleries first really jumped onto the potential boom and the existing boom of China, and with that Hong Kong, but invite James to maybe make it a bit clearer also for international audiences listening now, where the differences are between Korea and the rest of the Asian art scene and the market, but also the art world, because I seem to understand that they are quite significant. And also maybe talk a little bit about the support and the art school education for Korean artists here and how sort of that maps out within sort of the Asian context, if that's okay, James.
Well, that's a lot. You know, my knowledge is really focused on what's happening here. I suppose I could draw some comparisons and distinctions between Korea and, like, let's say the art scene in neighboring Japan or China, but I feel like that's something that Kelly probably has greater sort of overview and knowledge of. I would just reiterate that, you know, this sort of the simple flippant answer to why Korea now was because of BTS. And by that, I mean that the K-pop phenomenon as a cultural product has always struck me as something that was very local in terms of appeal. And I was wrong. It was unimaginable, the success and the reach that this cultural product has had throughout the globe. And there's really no one factor accounting for such a phenomenon. I don't think so. It just means that this country has arrived culturally, economically, and, as Kelly has pointed out, it does coincide with the general malaise that has extended forever in Japan over, you know, all of its, in particular, I would say, you know, most galleries will probably concur with me. There really isn't much of a contemporary art market there. And that says a lot because contemporary art reflects the most vital sort of creative activities of that country, that place at that moment. And that is what is happening in Korea now. Whereas with Hong Kong, as you say, also malaise, doom, sort of feeling of doom about the future, maybe. Korea, I would say, everybody is generally very optimistic about what will happen going forward. And that really explains what's happening, not just in the art market, but throughout other industries and markets as well.
Thank you, James. I think the word optimism is a really important word because I think it also means that it also represents what the arts are giving us and have always given us, which is a little bit of hope, or representing a hope we have into a future. And I think we've already seen in the last few days that we've all been here, how people are so interested in art, and the fact that you're all here today and watching online, I think also represents this belief in creativity in a future and the hope that comes with it. But I guess as a last question to this wonderful panel today, I can't ignore the fact that we're here because of art fairs in a way, although James rightly mentioned that Seoul is always worth a visit throughout the year. And we touched on the phenomenon of art fairs globally a little bit. I mean, Kelly knows as much as we all know that 2 years ago when the pandemic started, everyone was saying the age of the art fairs is over. We also see that, you know, everyone can't wait to get back into these convention centers and these halls and wants to see lots of art under one roof. So I would like to hear from each of you three, what do you think these international art fairs, well, locally and international art fairs can bring to the art scene and the art market here? What are the opportunities, but maybe also what should we be cautious about or just be aware of? Thank you.
As someone who operates a gallery, I think sort of the influx of international galleries into Seoul, I find to be salutary. I find that it just raises the level of the game, so to speak, makes everyone much more sophisticated, much more professional, and it just, you know, brings the standards up. And I note that most of the galleries who have set up shop here are, you know, what we would normally call sort of blue chip galleries, and I think that is hugely important. These galleries represent artists who, by general consensus throughout the art world, are important artists. And that the galleries that represent these artists are setting up shop in Seoul says a lot. And so it's not about sort of people coming here for short-term gain and sort of, bringing in speculative products. It's people bringing in, baselits and, so on. So I find this to be salutary, and I think it's just going to up the game for everyone.
I think that anything that could enrich an ecosystem is welcomed and is productive. So definitely the presence of two art fairs at the same time is an amazing opportunity for Seoul. As far as people and visitors do not just visit the fair, but even look at what is around it. And this is something that is crucial for the life of the fair, to really start at the fair and to see everything that is around it.
Yeah, I mean, I for one would like to sign up to be Giuseppe Panza. I would like to have money to just go to another country for 6 months out of the year and just meet with artists and buy them. But the truth is that's not realistic for most people. And that's why art fairs are a really necessary evil / benefit to the ecosystem, because if you're, a working parent, if you can come on a weekend and see 260 of the world's top galleries, including, dozens of Korean galleries, you're going to absorb a ton of information. And we are people who live on our phones, we live on our devices, we love to inhale a ton of information and then we go home and kind of metabolize it. So the rhythm of the art fair works for us as humans. It doesn't necessarily present the art in the best way, right? It is a little bit of a bastardization of the way in which you should see art. But it's very useful and convenient for younger collectors and for older collectors who just want to come through and, see everything quickly. So I think the proliferation of fairs has somewhat turned the art world into a seasonal, event-driven ecosystem, which is, I think, both good and bad. But certainly, as you move through the world and through the calendar year, you will see a lot of art. Some of that leads to the homogenization that Stefano realized. I would not want that to happen to Korea. I don't want everyone here just buying the same things that are in New York, because you have your own artists to cultivate, you have your own scene. And frankly, for those of us who flew 14 hours to get here, I don't need to see the same artists that I see in New York. I'd rather discover what you guys are into. But the fair does help because it's enough of a moment, right? That moment in the calendar that you can grab the art world's attention. And I think that's what Frieze brought to Korea, was just that breath of okay, mark your calendar, the gang's happening. That's what happened in Frieze LA. LA had a great scene, but it kind of needed a moment. There needed to be a moment where the art world all just decided, okay, we're going to spend basically Valentine's. I never see my husband on Valentine's. I'm always in LA working. But it's fine. I mean, it's a model that Basel has proven works, and it sort of just depends on how much effort, frankly, the galleries and the collecting scene around it sort of creates that moment that makes it a little bit less commercial and more worth the trip. So I hope you guys keep doing that, and I'll keep coming if so.
Thank you very much. We've run out of time. That went very quickly, I think. And all I can do is thank our wonderful panel for the day. I hope you will give them a big applause, and I really hope that you stick around for the other talks this afternoon. Thank you so much.